Greetings, Karate Illuminati. This is Noah, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about training with resistance, and specifically types of resistance. Now, training with resistance is very important to developing practical skills that you can actually apply. You can't just practice in the air or on a compliant partner all the time and be sure to develop effective skills. That said, there are really two types of resistance as I see it. Trained resistance and untrained resistance. And both of those have their own unique qualities and quirks and things that you need to address. For example, if you were to be sparring with someone who is similarly trained to you, there are certain reactions and certain types of resistance that you can expect from them that you wouldn't necessarily be able to rely on if you were fighting someone who was untrained. You can see this when you're sparring a white belt, for example. They do very strange things that to them are the natural reaction that they have, but to trained people is very unusual, very awkward. If you're used to fighting people at a relatively high level, you're used to being able to fake with the hip, fake with the shoulder without even throwing the strike to elicit some sort of reaction. And you're not going to get the same reaction out of an untrained person that you get out of a trained person. And that same thing applies once you start moving into things like takedowns and joint locks and chokes. Trained people have learned not only how to apply those techniques, but how to most effectively fight out of them. And so you now have to deal with somebody who knows all the same points of leverage that you are trying to use and can then move them or adjust, and it becomes very difficult to then apply your techniques, and that's the whole idea. On the other hand, trained people have trained reactions. They know how to use all these things, but untrained people don't. And when you're looking at it from a self-defense perspective, you're most likely going to be dealing with untrained people. And they provide their own unique challenges. They don't resist in the ways that you would expect a trained person to resist necessarily. They usually rely mostly on strength or sort of spazzing out and panicking. You end up having to deal with things like, for example, if you're trying to put somebody in an armbar, a standing armbar, for example, something like an armbar takedown that you would use in law enforcement. That's something that a trained person could very easily reach up and pull your arm off so that it no longer is there to apply pressure. An untrained person is less likely to do that, but they are much more likely to try and muscle this arm back. And a trained person may not want to do that. It takes a lot more effort. And so you get two different reactions to the same thing that you have to adjust for differently. So it's not enough to just train with trained resistance, and it's not enough to just train with untrained resistance. You're going to get different reactions in both. So I highly recommend that when you are working your techniques and your kata applications, in your training you include both forms of resistance. Trained resistance, where they know exactly how to beat it, and untrained resistance, where they're just trying to use strength or brute force in some capacity to escape or make it fail. You've got some basic things you can work on, even as simple as blocking things. You have trained people who are used to blocking and covering and moving. Untrained people have reactions more like the Moro reflex, for example, which is this hands out, turn the head away. And you've got your basic grasp reflex. Once people grab onto something, they have a tendency to hold onto it as strongly as they can, even when it's against their best interest, if there's a lot of adrenaline going on. So these are things for you to include in addition to working with your trained responses, so that you have the ability to deal with both.